Have you ever felt a chill run down your spine when imagining the unimaginable consequences of challenging the divine? Have you ever lain awake at night, wondering about the hidden battles raging in the spiritual realm, the mysteries of heaven, or questioned what occurred before humanity drew its very first breath? If these questions resonate with you, take a moment, like and subscribe to the Bible Stories channel and type 777 in the comments. Declare that your heart is open to uncovering the hidden truths, that your voice is part of the chosen generation, seeking understanding that pierces the surface and reaches straight to the core of the greatest mysteries. Now, let the hush settle around you. Inhale slowly and exhale as you sink gently into the ancient world, a city echoed with fear, intrigue, and ambition. Jerusalem, a place where power was not only political, but spiritual, where the invisible threads of authority wound tightly around the necks of the people, woven by two men whose very names sent shudders through the city: Caiaphas and Annas, high priests of unsurpassed dominion, men who, in their time, believed themselves to be arbiters of fate, deciding who would prosper, who would suffer, who would live, and who would be condemned to die. And in one fatal stroke, they convinced themselves that they could silence even the voice of God when they demanded the crucifixion of Jesus. But what followed was not an ending, not peace, not triumph. Instead, a shadow trailed them from the hill of Golgotha, inescapable darkness, patient and relentless, biding its time. Imagine a force, wordless but unyielding, haunting their steps, watching them, waiting. For even ancient scribes struggled to record the terror that ultimately befell these men. They believed they held control, a sip of divine power, a permanence of status, but judgment has a way of slipping through even the mightiest fingers. Do you too ever wonder, what does it mean to defy the will of God? Do you feel the tremor of judgment whispering through your own life? Allow this story to draw you deeper. For what you are about to encounter is not only the chilling downfall of men who thought they were untouchable, but a reverberating lesson on divine justice, eternal timing, and the invincibility of truth. Let us go back, step by careful step, and immerse ourselves in a world where every surface glittered with gold, every shadow held secrets, and every breath was thick with ambition. The tale begins with Annas, a behind-the-scenes mastermind, a quiet manipulator who sat in the seat of high priest around 06 AD, even when Rome stripped him of the title. It was not his undoing. Annas did not crave public glory. His power was subtle, like a puppeteer behind a curtain. One by one, his sons rose to the priesthood, cementing the family's legacy with each ascendancy, slotting themselves into the machinery of Jerusalem's sacred institutions. Yet, Annas' greatest chess move was yet to come, strategically placing his son-in-law Caiaphas as high priest, a tenure that would last longer than any before him. The city bowed in awe and dread, but true authority remained in the hands of Annas, the unseen regent. What is it like to hold such sway? To look across a city and see everyone, rich or poor, penitent or proud, trapped in your web, each sacrifice and offering a thread of gold spun tighter into your grasp. But with so much power, how easily can a heart go astray? Did Annas see himself as God's chosen, or had he become something else, an emperor in a temple, hungering for more than salvation? Glory, perhaps, or immortality. Picture the temple, a fortress of marble and gold, but to Annas, also a carefully measured business. The first thing any pilgrim encountered upon entry wasn't the hush of prayer, it was the clangor of commerce. Only an exclusive temple coin, provided at a price, could be offered to God, and who set those lucrative exchange rates? Annas' family, the sheep and doves, essential to worship, fetched extravagant sums. Devotion was expensive, and the coinage flowed inexorably upward to the high priestly coffers. Behind incense and ritual, humility was trampled beneath commerce, the sacred reduced to a means, the spiritual veiled by avarice. And so Jerusalem groaned under the weight not just of Roman rule, but of its own priestly elite. Rome found the system beneficial, peace maintained, taxes flowing, the leaders left to their own devices as long as civil order was not disturbed. For Annas and his clan, it was perfection, until, one day, perfection was cracked open. A carpenter from Galilee walked into their temple courts. Jesus, not just a teacher, but a force of action. Fire flashed in his eyes as he overturned the tables, coins cascading like the loss of all that was corrupt, animals fleeing in wild confusion. My house shall be called a house of prayer, but you have made it a den of thieves. These words, thundered in the hallowed court, were more than insult. They were a stake driven through the heart of Annas' empire. Imagine Annas' fury, a wound not to his pockets, but to his authority. And worse, the people listened. They followed. They dared to imagine a different kind of kingdom, one of justice, humility, and genuine access to God. How does a man respond when his world is threatened? Not by a foreign invader, but by truth incarnate. They could think of only one solution: remove the threat, but discreetly. Jesus' popularity made public violence untenable, so treachery was hatched in secret or trial at night. Witness after witness, a farce of justice manifesting as swift execution. They thought they were crushing a problem, but in their arrogance, they failed to see that they weren't contending with flesh and blood, but with God's very own plan for the world. Pause and consider, how many times have we valued safety, power, or position over the living truth, missing salvation in our own pursuit of control? In deposing Jesus, Annas and Caiaphas dug their own graves, sowed their own destruction. If you have ever felt the Lord's rescue in the face of injustice, declare God defends the innocent in the comments. Your words may be the lamp someone in darkness needs to see today. Just as God shielded his Son and all who stand firm in faith amid adversity, throughout Scripture, one thread remains constant: God delicately protects his children, and yet his justice is neither quick nor mild. For those who set themselves against his will, what awaits those who believe they can engineer fate, command righteousness, subvert the divine? Annas and Caiaphas are about to discover that in the most cataclysmic way imaginable. Do not turn away. With each word, descend deeper into the shadows, where human judgment collides with eternal justice. Here, where ambition and fear conspired to destroy a teacher, the story turns, and those who believed they wielded justice are caught in its unyielding grip. The hour grows late, the whisper of judgment stirs, and the unraveling begins. Like and subscribe. Let your pursuit of truth be counted among the chosen. Are you ready to see what happens when pride meets providence, when mortal arrogance encounters the unstoppable justice of God? Pause for a moment and imagine the sound of silence after the storm, the kind of silence that follows a terrible decision. When the world seems quieter and heavier, the air thick with consequence. Caiaphas and Annas, names that once sent ripples of fear through every heart in Jerusalem, believed their hand was the final word. They wielded authority that ruled over life and death, shaping destinies by fear, controlling wealth and poverty through a gloved fist. With chilling certainty, these high priests sealed Jesus' fate, and in their blindness, believed they had successfully silenced the very voice of God. What they could not know was that something unspeakably dark had been loosed, that day a force that would haunt, pursue, and ultimately consume them. The hills of Golgotha echoed not with Jesus' silence, but with the judgment that would follow these men to the grave and beyond. Let yourself gently descend into the shadowy aftermath of what many thought was a final victory. Annas, the master manipulator, reigned long after he lost his title. He orchestrated dynasties, weaving his sons into the high priesthood like a cunning spider, ensuring the family's name was ever entwined with power. His crowning maneuver, planting his ambitious son-in-law Caiaphas as high priest, his tenure stretching longer than any before. Yet, it was an empire built on invisible strings, a web of control tightening around the city with every day. Who was truly in command? Caiaphas, robed and public, or Annas, the silent puppeteer? Jerusalem's prayers, its sacrifices, its very faithful became tributaries to Annas' fortune, every pilgrim unknowingly feeding his insatiable grasp. Now, see through the marble magnificence of the temple, a place meant to echo with prayer, but echoing instead with coins and commerce. Under the guise of worship, Annas' family monopolized the exchange of temple currency, controlled the sale of spotless lambs, exploiting sacred law for immense profit. The system was flawless. The people had no choice. They were required to worship, and every hope for forgiveness came at a price, one that soared far beyond the market's value. Families who could barely afford bread bent under the weight of these offerings, while the elite grew fat on the temple's gold. Rome looked upon it all and smiled. Order was preserved, taxes flowed. The puppet masters remained, so long as peace was not disturbed. But power breeds fear, and fear breeds desperate violence. Into this well-oiled machinery strode a solitary, uncompromising threat, a carpenter with fire in his gaze. Jesus of Nazareth swept through the temple courts, overturning tables and scattering prophets like autumn leaves. My house shall be called a house of prayer, but you have made it a den of thieves. His words were not just an insult, they were an upheaval, a direct challenge to the very bedrock of Annas' authority. Consider the fury and terror in Annas' chest as crowds listened, not mocking but believing. How does one react when the fortress you believed unassailable is shaken to its core by a single voice, a voice not of power, but of unyielding truth and divine purpose? Annas and Caiaphas could see their kingdom slipping through bloodless fingers. The answer was swift and cold: destroy the threat. Yet, they could not afford to move in daylight, to risk turning the crowds, so they schemed, cloaked by shadows, a secret trial, false witnesses, the silent quickness of death. A plan to solve all problems with one stone thrown. But in their pride, they forgot what it means to stand against God Himself. They thought they could remove a nuisance, not realizing they were fighting the source of all life. How often, in our own quests for control or comfort, do we risk ignoring the deeper truth standing right before us, thinking salvation lies in status or security, not in surrender? Type God defends the innocent in the comments if, in a season of your life, you have known God's sheltering hand in a time of adversity. Your simple declaration might be the beacon someone groping in darkness needs. Scripture weaves an immutable lesson. God shields His faithful, but His justice slow, silent, and certain pursues all who set themselves in rebellion. That fateful night, every sacred law was trampled beneath ambition. Jewish tradition was clear. Trials could not convene under darkness or during the holy festivals. 2 agreeing witnesses were required for death, yet not a single testimony matched. Still, Caiaphas pressed onward, desperate to end what they feared most. Beneath flickering lamps, as Jesus stood in chains, Caiaphas cried out, "Tell us, are you the Messiah, the Son of God?" With calm more terrible than thunder, Jesus spoke, "I am, and you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of power, coming with the clouds of heaven." The sanctuary held its breath. Ancient prophecy walked across the floor, while Caiaphas tore his robes in drama and horror. What he failed to recognize was far more profound. His actions were not thwarting God, but fulfilling precisely what had been written. Isaiah's words unfolded in silence. He was oppressed, yet he did not open his mouth. Each moment of injustice, each violation of sacred process, each lie became bricks in the very road God designed. How often are we too blind to God's orchestration, convinced our strength compels history, never perceiving we are actors on a stage, centuries in rehearsal? When you have seen the hand of God vindicate you in a moment of helplessness, share God's justice prevails. In the comments, your testimony strengthens the weary and you join a cloud of witnesses stretching through millennia. But the greatest irony was yet to play out. Less than 2 months after their vaunted triumph, Peter, once fearful, now anointed, stood before these same rulers and thundered, "You killed the author of life, but God raised him from the dead." Consider the dismay, the gnawing terror, as Caiaphas and Annas realized that the finality they craved had backfired. The death they decreed was breaking open heaven itself. From the very moment Jesus died, the world itself seemed to convulse. The noon sun extinguished into eerie darkness for 3 hours. Nature grieved or protested. Jerusalem, at the zenith of its Passover, fell silent beneath an alien shadow. Then the earth shook violently. The temple's great veil, thick as a man's arm and 60 feet high, split in two from top to bottom. The very foundation of priestly privilege, the curtain that upheld their exclusivity, justified their commerce, buttressed their power, was shredded by an unseen hand. Their spiritual monopoly had ended in one stroke. Visualize it. A servant dashing breathless to Caiaphas. The valet is torn. Panic. For with its destruction, the sacred distinction evaporated. Their access to God's presence, now every man's inheritance. God Himself had signaled that the old order was finished. The family that had clothed itself in inherited privilege now trembled. Sensing authority fleeing with the wind, whispers began to swirl. In the night, in the streets, in taverns, and around family tables, rumors abounded. Righteous dead appearing, tombs bursting open, people who had lain for years now awake and walking. The Gospel of Matthew records it. The living and the dead, the seen and the unseen, the natural and supernatural, became blurred. Annas and Caiaphas heard it, all their sleepless nights disrupted by stories that refuse to die. How does terror grow in the heart of a tyrant when everything they trusted, every weapon, every coin, every calculated plan is suddenly powerless? They raced to Pilate, sealed the tomb, guards posted, an imperial seal laid. But on the third day, guards returned, trembling with accounts of light, rolling stones, otherworldly power. In a frantic attempt to rewrite what could not be contained, Caiaphas paid the guards to lie, to say the disciples stole the body. Yet deep down, they knew the movement was now fire, not smoke. They could bribe the sentries, purchase lies, but the truth had already exploded out of the grave, and no treasury could smother it. How many times do we see the powerful desperately clutching what is slipping away by resorting to deception, bribery, manipulation, forgetting that divine truth cannot be bought or buried? Each of us at some point has tried to cover a guilty conscience with frenzied effort, yet the light always finds its way. The weeks that followed were a torrent. What they believed destroyed was growing, a wildfire fanned by the very wind of God at Pentecost. The very disciples they'd sought to break stood in the temple declaring resurrection, dissolving fear in the sunrise of unstoppable courage. Miracles erupted. The healed and the whole danced before all Jerusalem. Thousands flocked to this nascent faith priest, after priest turned traitor to their own institution. Now obedient to the faith, Annas watched as his dynasty hemorrhaged members. Rome, restive and nervous, saw in this uprising the shadow of rebellion, a threat far greater than a mere prophet. Finally, after 18 years of Caiaphas' reign, it all collapsed. Rome intervened. The governor stripped him of office, and the vestments that once weighed heavy with power were ripped from his shoulders. His disgrace was swift, public, and irrevocable. He was summoned to Rome a prisoner, a cautionary spectacle. Annas' family lost, piece by piece, every privilege they had stitched together, the fabric of their legacy unraveling before their very eyes. But their humiliation was only a prelude to an even darker doom. Ancient accounts whisper of Annas arrested his body, swaddled in wet oxide, left to dry under a merciless sun, the skin shrinking until he suffocated in agony. Lonely and brutal, his end mirrored his reign, relentless, calculated, ultimately crushed by the very restraints he once imposed on others. Caiaphas' path diverged. Stripped of meaning, shamed and broken, he wandered in a twilight of torment, consumed by guilt so profound it gnawed his soul. Some say he died by his own hand, unable to bear the hideous weight of conscience. The mighty reduced to legend, not of glory, but of warning. Not only did they lose position, status, family, and wealth, they left behind a darker inheritance. Their stories whispered as cautionary tales that no man, no office, no gold can shield against God's perfect justice. In a world obsessed with success and control, what foundation are we building on? The lesson blazes: unless our power, our work, our very sense of righteousness is aligned with God's unfolding purpose, it is no more lasting than dust in the wind. The fate of Annas and Caiaphas is a warning etched across centuries, the echoing truth that God's justice may linger, but it never fails. Are our own ambitions leading us toward the light, or toward a shadow we cannot see? Let your heart sit quietly with that question, and if you sense even a flicker of recognition, share in the comments. God's plan is unstoppable. Like and subscribe to Bible Stories if your spirit seeks more than surface faith, for here, together, we are uncovering the deep, inexorable movements of God's hand through history and through us. Take a moment to quiet your heart and dwell in the aftermath, when the dust has barely settled but the consequences begin to seep through every crack and corridor of Jerusalem's once imposing strongholds. Imagine Caiaphas, once clothed in power, now shaken, retreating behind closed doors as whispers ignite like kindling in the night air. Rumors of resurrection, sightings of the impossible, reports that dead men walk, and the very earth and heavens seem to have split open to protest the dreadful deed carried out atop Golgotha. There's a palpable fiara chill that even gold-lined chambers cannot repel. Now, descend with me into the streets and sanctuaries, where ordinary people are left grappling with what they have witnessed. The sun's ominous midday darkness, the quake that tossed the temple stones, and that torn Velevri event, a strike against the illusion that any family or institution, no matter how entrenched, can stand against the will of God without cost. How many times in Scripture does the divine append the constructs of men, scattering arrogance like chaff in the wind? We see the seeds of psalmist lament. Unless the Lord builds the house, they labor in vain who build it. Exalted human, ambition is now shown for what it is: fragile, brittle, powerless before the Creator's hand. Yet, behind every shaken priest and astonished merchant, subtle shifts take root. The old order is splintering, its foundations now revealed as sand, rather than stone. For years, the family of Annas and Caiaphas profited from the sacred, turning worship into economy, prayer into transaction. Now, the torn veil, thicker than a man's palm, taller than a house, testifies that access to the Holy of Holies is permanently open, not by priestly mediation, but by the sacrifice of God's own Son. The exclusivity that propped up their power is exposed as obsolete. The true high priest has entered once and for all. In the weeks that follow, Jerusalem is not merely uneasy, it trembles. Devout followers roam the alleys, speaking in new tongues, healing the sick. Peter and John, once frightened and scattered, now speak with authority that astonishes even their adversaries. Their message is blunt, burning with conviction. You killed the author of life, but God raised him from the dead. Each pronouncement is both a condemnation and a strange offer of hope, mercy for those who repent, justice for those who refuse. The truth shatters silence. The old guard is confounded. Many priests even abandon the old ways, their hearts pierced by the undeniable power on display. The dynasty of Annas, so carefully constructed, now hemorrhages loyalty. Trusted family members begin to defect, drawn irresistibly to what they once opposed. Imagine the anxiety night after night, haunted not just by the ghosts of those they wronged, but by the relentless progress of a movement they can no longer contain nor comprehend. There are clandestine meetings, desperate counsels, fruitless attempts to muzzle the witnesses. Nothing abates the tide. Now pause. How often does the impulse to control and preserve our own kingdoms leave us fighting in vain against a tide set in motion by heaven itself? Consider again the Psalms. The Lord brings the counsel of the nations to nothing. He frustrates the plans of the peoples. Can anything be more humbling than to watch your schemes dissolve in the presence of the divine narrative? There is one last and cunning hope in the minds of Caiaphas and Annas: corruption. If they cannot stop the truth, perhaps they may at least obscure it. They bribe the guards with silver, instructing them to spread lies. Say his disciples stole the body while you slept. With each bag of silver, they mimicked the failing strategy that condemned Judas. Final, desperate clinging to deceit. But truth is a lion. It needs only to be unleashed. If, in your journey, you have ever tried to shield yourself from unwelcome reality, only to find that truth finally, blessedly breaks through, reflect on this section. Share in the comments. Truth sets us free. Like and subscribe to Bible Stories so that together, as searchers, we continue to unearth what cannot be hidden. Learning gently but irrevocably from the past, what unfolds is beyond their comprehension, a movement fueled not by revenge but by love, compassion, and hope. The more they suppress, the brighter the light seems to shine. For every unjust act, there is an eruption of miraculous healing, a multiplication of changed hearts. Even the Roman overseers grow restless, recognizing an energy that cannot be contained by policies or threats, but in the still, quiet places. After the crowds disperse and the prayers simmer down to whispers, Annas and Caiaphas sit alone. The silence is no longer pleasant, but heavy. The realization dawns: to oppose the purposes of God is to sow wind and reap a whirlwind. What once brought pride now brings only regret and confusion. Echoes of the psalmist's question: why do the nations rage and the peoples plot in vain? Let us for a moment become still with them, letting the weight of consequence work its way inward. There is mercy even here, for every life susceptible to pride is also eligible for redemption. But the choice must be made: continue resisting the path heaven sets, or finally surrender to greater truths that remold the soul. Finally, for you who listen and reflect, carry the message forward: resistance to truth delays but cannot thwart the purposes of God. The path from arrogance to humility is sometimes paved with suffering, but it is also the road to wisdom and life that truly matters. If this speaks to something deep within you, type "I choose truth" in the comments, and join this living community of seekers who are gentle in spirit, hungry for what is real, and eager for the grace that always, quietly, persists. Let us still our hearts and settle into the quiet tension of Jerusalem, where power, once so absolute, seems to erode with every new rumor whispered behind closed doors. It is a city altered forever, haunted by signs and wonders, and by a fear that neither violence nor gold can keep at bay. The downfall of the great high priestly line has moved from rumor to a living reality, as those who once governed with iron will now pace nervously, unable to silence the tremors they set in motion. Picture Caiaphas as he wanders the chambers that once felt like fortresses, suffocated by a guilt that has become both companion and tormentor. Night after night, visions haunt his sleep, not of political plots or public applause, but of a torn veil, an empty tomb, the echo of words spoken by the man he condemned. You will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of power, coming with the clouds of heaven. Is there any armor against such memories? Any fortress against the quiet invasion of conscience? Meanwhile, honors whose mastery over Jerusalem once seemed invincible is forced to bear witness as his sons, nephews, and even trusted allies abandon the order, drawn by the wild courage of the apostles. The city changes before his eyes. Money changes, and merchants whisper about lost profits. Pilgrims' eyes shine, not with resignation but with hope. News that once slipped quietly through the city now races. Paralyzed men leap to their feet. The broken are restored, and the message of Jesus, one they thought extinguished, burns hotter than ever in the background. The shadow of Rome lengthens. Reports of unrest and miraculous events reach the governors in Syria, and antipathy hardens into policy. Now, Annas and Caiaphas, once benefactors of Roman favor, become liability, symbols of instability, scapegoats for crackdowns. The very system they manipulated now isolates them. Rome values only peace, and peace is vanishing from Jerusalem. In the new community forming these followers of the way, their love overturns old orders. Food is shared, widows cared for, and prayers for enemies offered by those who had, until so recently, cowered behind locked doors. The spirit moves and fear loses its grip. Even the old priestsmen who recited law and tradition by rote find themselves drawn to this irresistible movement. They weep, not for personal loss, but awakening, discovering that centuries of longing have been fulfilled in the risen Christ. Pause now and consider, how deeply have we built our lives on routines of power or privilege, only to find the ground shifting under our feet? Are there places in your own soul where God's grace invites you beyond self-protection, where brokenness is not a curse but the entry to new life? The old world's collapse is not simply a defeat, it makes possible a new kingdom, where the last are first and the humble are lifted. Let us reflect on the words of the prophets, that the Lord resists the proud but gives grace to the humble. In the fall of Caiaphas and Annas, we see more than justice, we see the gentle, yet relentless, call toward humility, honesty, and surrender. Their undoing is not just punishment. It is a warning and a beckoning, a signpost, pointing every proud heart toward a gentler way. If you find yourself moved by the notion that grace can rise from ashes, type "Grace Reigns" in the comments. Like and subscribe to Bible Stories to stay alongside this unfolding journey, not as mere spectators, but as participants in a story that invites each of us to let go of pride and move gently into the mysterious safety of God's plan. The days of absolute power for Annas and Caiaphas are now over, replaced by an unending pressure that neither power nor piety can relieve. Their names, once spoken in awe and fear, now carry a hint of tragedy, a reminder that all human strength fails before the quiet, unstoppable movement of truth. The true judge has spoken, and history bends inexorably toward justice, not out of vengeance, but to recall us always to humility, courage, and hope. Let this section breathe through you as an invitation. When all is said and done, may our own stories be ones not dominated by pride or regret, but by the quiet, steady pulse of grace for ourselves, grace for others, and the hard-won humility that delivers true peace. Let your thoughts calm like water after a storm, entering the quiet expanse left behind when pride shatters and ambition withers. In Jerusalem, the power once wielded by Annas and Caiaphas has not simply dissipated, has inverted, turning inward, becoming a weight too heavy to bear. The city, once tightly chained by their decrees, moves on. News of their disgrace has swept through the alleys and marketplaces, but it resonates most deeply within the very souls of those who had watched these men command the thunder and reckon with the whirlwind, no longer bathed in applause or trembling deference, Their names now provoke uneasy silences and furtive glances, a quiet acknowledgement that the world, and heaven, has irrevocably changed. Imagine the sorrow that creeps slowly through the remnants of their dynasty. Relatives, once flush with inherited privilege, begin to vanish into obscurity. What were once cozy alliances are now quiet estrangements. For those who remain, see the fate of Annas and Caiaphas as a living parable, one not of triumph but warning. Some attempt to defend the legacy, arguing that it is better to have erred in zeal for the law than to have abandoned it. Others recognize, as if newly awakened, that defending pride against divine purpose is not zeal but folly. Each is left contemplating the same ancient question. What shall it profit a man if he gains the whole world, yet forfeits his soul? Sit now with the ache of regret. In early Christian gatherings, stories of these men become timeless caution. Children hear of Anna's ruthless strategies not as a saga of greatness, but as a lesson on the perils of putting commerce ahead of compassion and ritual above righteousness. The wealth that once draped the family in finery now serves as an example that riches and titles are fleeting shields against the encroaching truth of God's purposes. For even the chosen priests, even those who held the revered office and spoke the language of the sanctuary, are not immune to judgment when they misuse what has been entrusted. Consider for a moment how closely this echoes the underlying rhythm of the Psalms. Blessed are those whose ways are blameless, who walk according to the law of the Lord. But what of those who pervert justice for profit, who see worship as opportunity rather than devotion? The stories told around kitchen tables and in moonlit courtyards no longer speak reverently of Annas and Caiaphas. Instead, their rise and fall punctuates sermons about the cost of turning sacred trust into self-advancement. But meanwhile, the faith that they once tried so hard to stamp out flourishes. The apostles, who themselves had been fugitives, condemned, and hunted, lead not from positions of inherited authority, but from the power of transformed hearts and steadfast purpose. Miracles ripple outward. Former enemies break bread together. The poor and sick are lifted up. The contrast is sharp, almost painful. Where the high priestly dynasty used law and tradition to enforce distance, the Christ followers now draw near, embodying the message of grace. Annas and Caiaphas held at arm's length. On this new order, it is not rare for those once aligned with the old power to quietly approach the apostles in the darkness, asking for prayers, seeking forgiveness. Stories spread of former officials and even priests weeping, confessing regret, yearning for the peace they never found in the temple's shadowy halls. The Christian movement, radiant within its humble beginnings, is forged all the stronger for its roots in suffering and injustice. The fire meant to destroy it kindles its resolve. Now, let us reflect. How often do the hardest lessons come not from what we achieve, but from what falls apart? Do we, like Annas and Caiaphas, ever mistake our blessings for guarantees, thinking that position or knowledge protects rather than calls us to deeper humility and service? The downfall of these high priests is a living echo of the Proverbs. Pride goes before destruction, a haughty spirit before a fall. Their end becomes not only a story of judgment, but an invitation to radical honesty with ourselves. Pause in stillness for a beat. When stripped of every title, every defense, what remains is the raw cry for mercy, something even the proudest can utter at their lowest. The story does not simply close with their demise. It opens a door for every witness and listener, an unspoken question about the foundation on which we build our own legacy. If anything in this journey stirs your conscience or offers a new perspective, take a moment to like and subscribe to Bible Stories. Let this act mark your own pursuit of wisdom and grace, anchoring you in a community that does not shrink from hard truths, but leans gently into them, humbled, thoughtful, and always open to the possibility of redemption. As we move forward, allow the cautionary example of Annas and Caiaphas to linger, not to torment or terrify, but to keep our hearts soft and our vision clear. Let the downfall of those who traded communion with God for fleeting prestige stir in each of us a renewed hunger to choose service over status, compassion over command, and to seek always the restless, unshakable mercy that outlasts every earthly empire. Let your thoughts linger in the quiet ruins left by the ambitions of Annas and Caiaphas. Consider how the mighty, who once commanded the fate of a city, are now remembered not for their wisdom or compassion, but for the caution etched into their legacy. the collapse of their power left Jerusalem changed in ways that reached far beyond politics or economy. It resounded in the spiritual fabric of an entire people, probing deep questions about judgment, conscience, and the mysterious workings of divine justice. Move through the shadowed corridors of memory and imagine what it must have been like for Caiaphas in the aftermath of his disgrace. No longer surrounded by the throngs of admirers, he finds himself haunted by the ghostly echoes of a torn veil, the darkness that fell at noon, and every shattering moment that exposed the limits of human intervention in sacred matters. Power, once an armor, now becomes a chain dragged through endless nights of regret. In such silence, judgment loses its abstract quality, settling instead as a heavy presence, a silent but unyielding reminder that no position can protect against the reckoning planted within the heart. For Annas, the end was no less grim. Removed from the center of power, his name gradually became synonymous with warning rather than leadership. Every ally and kinship he'd worked to secure fell away in the long shadow of collective memory, leaving a skeleton of what had once been celebrated as divine favor. Rumors of his tragic and agonizing final days, deprived of dignity and relief, served as living parables, as if the physical suffering visited upon him was only the final installment in a series of choices that prioritized control over compassion. Early Christian communities retold these stories with a purpose deeper than mere justice or retribution. For them, the fates of these high priests were not simply historical footnotes but moral mirrors, reflecting both the danger of resisting truth and the constant availability of grace to those who seek it with humility. Their narrative was not just a tale of downfall, but a sobering call to self-examination, a reminder that every action, every decision made in defiance or pride, sows seeds with consequences that may outlast a generation. The world they left behind was not empty. In fact, it was brimming with new life, one that grew from the very suffering they had attempted to inflict. The followers of Jesus, undeterred by threats or even martyrdom, built a community marked not by the accumulation of power but by genuine service and radical forgiveness, where Annas and Caiaphas once enforced separation through their control of the temple and its symbols. The new order welcomed all to draw near to God through a spirit of fellowship and humility. Pause and reflect. How often do people seek to maintain control, even as the evidence of change and the invitation to a new way becomes undeniable? How many times, in every age, have institutions or individuals clung to the relics of authority, resisting the voice of conscience or the obvious shifts in the currents of history? The story of Caiaphas and Annas stands for all who have mistaken their appointed season for permanence, who believed that status or tradition could prevent the inevitable work of transformation. Dive deeper. The Psalms warn that those who trust in chariots and horses will stumble, but those who trust in the Lord will endure. The truth of this is visible in every line of the fall of Jerusalem's high priestly dynasty. The protections erected by Annas and Caiaphas to insulate, to dominate, to secure proved more fragile than any realized. With each step they took to distance themselves from the movement Jesus began, they unwittingly shaped their own undoing. Not through the hand of any single adversary, but through the persistent unfolding of providence. Their journey offers a paradox. The further they moved from humility, the more vulnerable they became. When they had strategies for everything, manipulating legal systems, buying silence, leveraging alliances, they imagined themselves immune to reversal. Yet the actual protection, the true sanctuary, is found not in schemes, but in the quiet courage of repentance, the openness to being changed even after years of pride. Picture the early believers gathering in homes, breaking bread, sharing what little they had, not out of force but of love. Among them, stories of Annas and Caiaphas were reimagined as lessons in letting go. Some who once served the temple now knelt in these humble gatherings, confessing their part, seeking forgiveness, weeping as relief replaced shame. Their presence signaled the beginnings of hope, that no fall, however dramatic or deserved, ruled out restoration in the eyes of God. Consider the message for us. If the arc of divine justice can bend so far as to redeem even those who seemed most lost, if the echo of grace can reach the high halls of failed priests, then there is hope for every person who feels defeated by their own prideful missteps. The fall of Annas and Caiaphas was tragic, yes, but not final in the sense of God's desire for redemption. Embrace this moment to look inward with gentleness and honesty. If, in your own life, you discern an area where pride, fear, or desperation has held sway, know that the ongoing movement of grace is as real now as it was then. In the place where power failed and conscience awakened, light found its way in. If this reflection brings you pause, and you feel the truth of second chances stirring within, let others know you are not alone. Share fresh starts begin here in the comments. And remember, as you continue with Bible stories, to like and subscribe, joining with a community that cherishes not only the awe and weight of justice, but the gentle, continuous possibility of renewal. Allow these meditations to settle into your spirit, not with fear, but with a sense of hopeful realism. The legacies of Annas and Caiaphas remain as both caution and invitation to seek power, yes, but always as a path for service, to defend truth, not as a weapon, but as a light, by which all may see, and to accept that in every ending, there is space if we desire it for the beginnings that only grace can provide. Let a deep and gentle silence fill your mind, as if you were listening to the wind move through the ancient stones of Jerusalem, the hush that lingers after the fall of strongholds, when those who once ruled are nothing more than stories, half remembered and edged with warning. In the echo that remains, consider those left behind by the downfall of Annas and Caiaphas, kinfolk who bear a name that stings in the telling, citizens whose memories twist triumph into tragedy, and a new generation seeking wisdom in the ruins of pride. The world has changed, and into the vacuum pour questions more urgent, more searching than before. What becomes of a community when its leaders, once the highest authorities in faith and law, are swept away by the judgment they unleashed? How does a people rebuild trust when its sacred institutions lie exposed, their foundations cracked by ambition and self-preservation? There is no simple answer, only the slow, sometimes painful journey toward truth. And in this journey, we find the gentle workings of mercy mingled with justice. After the collapse of Annas and Caiaphas' dynasty, Jerusalem faced a long and uncertain reckoning. In their absence, the priestly caste struggled to regain its moorings, casting about for new footholds as the city reeled from Roman intervention and spiritual upheaval. Former allies of the old regime scattered, some faded quietly into irrelevance. Others attempted to restore the fragments of their privilege, but the shadow of disgrace lingered. The stories that emerged around nighttime fires and at morning prayers grew somber, marked not by nostalgia, but by admiration. Even the loyalty of those closest to Annas and Caiaphas was transformed. Where admiration had reigned, now uncomfortable doubt took root. Yet there, in the valley of disappointment, a new vision began to take shape. No longer could authority rest upon lineage, title, or the trappings of tradition alone. The collapse of the once mighty priesthood forced a shift. People began to look not to human intermediaries, but upward to faith itself, freshly reimagined in the wake of calamity. The earliest followers of Jesus, once dismissed or persecuted, emerged as beacons in this fractured landscape. Their leadership did not rely on wealth, inheritance, or ritual power, but on compassion, humility, and the radical memory of a love that endures betrayal and conquers even death. Imagine the gatherings in borrowed rooms and secret courtyards, where new believers sat beside former skeptics, sharing food, stories, and prayers. The message of forgiveness thundered quietly through these scenes. No sin too deep, no failure too final, that it could block the path to restoration. Those who had watched the priests fall understood with new clarity. True strength was now measured by willingness to serve and to seek reconciliation, not to dominate or exact tolls from the desperate. The old system, once rigid with obligation, layered with golden barriers, gave way to a movement rooted in welcome and the possibility of inner change. From this perspective, the fate of Annas and Caiaphas was not just a warning, but an invitation. Through their error and its consequences, a deeper truth emerged, that every system, no matter how sacred, must be surrendered when it stands in the way of God's unfolding hope. In the words of the psalmist, the sacrifices of God are a broken spirit, a broken and contrite heart. O God, you will not despise. This became the refrain of those navigating the aftermath. The humble became teachers. The meek grew bold, and former enemies discovered they were fellow travelers on a path that led beyond vengeance into grace. What of the ordinary people, those who had once benefited from the careful order Annas and Caiaphas kept, or who suffered quietly beneath it? Their journey was one of relearning, unlearning habits of fear and discovering the strange freedom that comes when power is made perfect in weakness. Some wrestled with the loss of certainty, their prayers shaped by longing for what had been. Others, sensing the birth of something new, found solace in communal acts of kindness, in the bold testimony of the apostles, and in stories of healing that traveled from mouth to mouth, like light in the darkness. The parables of Jesus took on new resonance, the proud brought low, the humble exalted, the shepherd who leaves 99 to search for the lost one, the father who runs to embrace the prodigal son. For those reflecting on the fates of their former leaders, these stories offered not only consolation, but courage. Slowly, hope flickered again, not in a restoration of the old order, but in the promise that every downfall opens the possibility for redemption, that what is broken can yet be blessed. For the early Christian community, the names of Annas and Caiaphas lived on not as curses or objects of scorn, but as reminders that every generation faces the choice between empire and empathy, between protecting privilege and embracing truth. Their legacy, paradoxically, became the soil from which new convictions sprang, a warning about pride, yes, but also a witness to the unyielding patience of grace. Even those who feared they were too far gone learned that the first step toward healing is simple: acknowledge failure, seek forgiveness, and open the heart to transformation. If these reflections echo within you, if you have known seasons where disappointment led to awakening, or if you recognize the quiet urgency in letting go of broken systems for the sake of greater good, take a moment to breathe it in. Write "New Hope Arises" in the comments if you feel called to be part of this journey. Don't forget to like and subscribe to Bible Stories, staying tuned for the unfolding narrative of a story, not merely of ancient judgment, but of ongoing possibility, where every loss may yet become a seed for true and lasting renewal. Pause here, and let the lesson of Section 7 draw you deeper. The way forward is never merely in holding harder to what's been lost, but in yielding to the future that mercy is ever eager to give. Let us move quietly into the deeper reflections that follow the collapse of ambition and the silent dispersal of those once known as gatekeepers to the sacred. In the generations that followed the fall of Annas and Caiaphas, Jerusalem's stones bore silent witness to the slow unfurling of a new order, one not built on inherited influence or ritual, but on an ever-deepening consciousness of justice, mercy, and the ineffable reach of grace. Pause, as if crossing a threshold out of the domain of earthly power and into the world of legacy. How the stories of Annas and Caiaphas transformed from urgent reality to whispered caution, and eventually to symbols used by parents and teachers, by strangers in the temple courts, and by children playing in the shade of ruined walls. The names that once inspired deference and dread were now shaded with sadness, a quiet awe at how impermanent even the grandest schemes can be. In the absence of their dominance, the people's memory did not romanticize their rule, but dissected it, reimagined it, and used it as fertile ground for what might come next. These stories took on the ring of scripture, folding into the collective experience of a traumatized but hopeful city. The fall of the priestly dynasty became a prism for examining every new leader, every policy, every yearning for progress. Who could be trusted? Could any structure stand if its foundations were pride and self-preservation? The words of the prophets lingered anew. He has shown you, O man, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you but to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God? In household prayers and in the courts of wisdom, the fate of Annas and Caiaphas stood as a profound answer, an admonition to walk gently with whatever measure of influence or inheritance might come one's way. For the early Christians, these memories were more than historical details. They were reminders of the inescapable movement of divine purpose. The apostles reminded all who would listen of how the plans of men, devised in secrecy and executed with the utmost care, shattered so quickly in the light of truth. They pointed not only to the torn veil and empty tomb, but also to the quiet conversions and reconciliations taking place daily in new gatherings. Evidence that justice finds its highest expression when it leads to mercy in new community. In this evolving atmosphere, some who once thrived under Annas and Caiaphas, scribes, guards, extended relatives, faced hard reckonings with their pasts. Many found the courage to approach the apostles, confessing their histories, seeking forgiveness, asking to be made new. There were stories of restitution, of lives redirected toward helping the poor and tending the wounds left by years of oppression. In the earliest churches, where the teachings of Jesus were recited by lamp and memory, stories of downfall became invitations to humility and hope. But not all saw the lesson so easily. There were those who, out of fear or pride, clung more tightly to forms, titles, and old antagonisms. They rebuilt their security around fresh rituals and subtle prejudices, attempting to recreate the lost comfort of yesterday. It was a struggle, familiar to all ages, whether to let tragedy soften the heart or harden it, whether to seek new wisdom or double down on old certainties. Thus, the death of Annas and Caiaphas rippled still, not just in the fate of their lineage, but in the living choices of everyone who stood in the shadow of their legacy. And yet, against this very human resistance, life pressed forward. New festivals and commemorations appeared, not to mourn the lost grandeur, but to celebrate the enduring promise that God's justice is always married to his invitation for repentance and fresh beginnings. Children would run past the ruins with laughter, a sign that the cycles of judgment and mercy are unbroken, and that the new world being born would not be bound by the failures of those who came before. Allow yourself to reflect here, in the aftermath and the beginning, on the haunting question: when power, privilege, and certainty are swept away, what remains? The psalmist promises, when the foundations are destroyed, what can the righteous do? The answer has lived by the early believers and all who sought peace in the shadow of judgment was simple: remember, repent, forgive, and build again, always with God at the center, always with the lessons of brokenness guiding the hands that restore. If the story of Section 8 stirs in you a recognition of times when life swept the old away and asked you to begin anew, write Foundations Renewed in the comments. Like and subscribe to Bible Stories if you are committed to seeking wisdom, not just in triumph, but also in the patient, daily work of rebuilding faith, community, and courage from the ashes of the past. Let the knowledge remain with you. Every downfall contains within it the seeds of a fresh beginning, and even the darkest chapters can become the sacred soil in which new hope is tenderly planted and lovingly grown. Let us pause and open ourselves to the profound gravity of the final chapter in the lives of Caiaphas, Annas, and the tangled power struggles surrounding them. The story draws to a close, not merely with loss of titles or political disgrace, but with a haunting reckoning that transcends earthly authority, a reckoning wrought by divine justice that neither wealth, influence, nor reputation can evade. Picture the scene: Caiaphas, once the feared high priest whose command shaped fates, now publicly stripped of his office, humiliated before the eyes of the city he once ruled. Rome, no longer content to tolerate instability, moves decisively, removing from power the man who had promised peace but delivered turmoil. His sacred garments, the symbols that once heralded his authority, are torn away, exposing a vulnerability that no earthly armor can cover. The dynasty that Annas meticulously built, with its intricate control over the temple's wealth and worship, now crumbles piece by piece, leaving behind only memory and warning. But political downfall was only the beginning of their fate. Ancient accounts speak of Annas' terrible end, captured and bound in wet oxide straps, a cruel punishment whose tightening as the leather dried caused unbearable suffocation and agony. This death was appropriately horrific, symbolic in its cruelty, a physical manifestation of divine retribution, squeezing the life from a man who once squeezed power from the people of Jerusalem. The irony is bitter: the very cords that enforced his control became the instruments of his demise. Alone, far from home, Annas met a fate no king or priest could escape. Agonizing justice dispensed in its fullest measure. Caiaphas' end was no less tragic, though different in nature. Stripped of office and influence, he was left to battle inner torment, the crushing weight of guilt at having condemned the innocent, at having rejected the Messiah himself, slowly unraveled his spirit. Tales passed down to us speak of a man, consumed by despair, wandering lost in the shadows of regret, his soul gnawed by memories he could neither quell nor escape. Eventually, unable to bear the burden, Caiaphas is said to have taken his own life, his fall from power, mirrored by a descent into spiritual darkness deeper than any political disgrace. These endings echo a profound biblical truth: no power or success shields one from the consequences of opposing God's will. The story of their lives and deaths serves as a cautionary tale reverberating through early Christian communities. reminding all believers that God's justice is both inevitable and inexorable. Attempts to silence truth and manipulate fate cannot prevail. Recent archaeological discoveries, such as the ornate burial box inscribed with the name of Joseph, son of Caiaphas, lend historical weight to these accounts, confirming that these were not mere legends but real men whose choices shaped history. Yet, historical validation does not alter the deeper spiritual lessons their stories impart. Their legacy, marred by pride and tragic justice, culminated with the ultimate destruction of the temple in AD 70. When Roman legions leveled the sacred sanctuary once controlled by their family. The gold melted by the invading flames, and the stones scattered as Jesus had forsworn. Not one stone here will be left on another. The vast system of power and worship that sustained their dynasty was utterly obliterated, a divine response, carved into history's very fabric. Amid all this judgment, there is also profound mercy. Though Caiaphas and Annas chose rebellion, their actions inadvertently set the stage for the greatest redemption known: the cross and resurrection of Jesus Christ. Their efforts to silence the Savior only fulfilled the divine plan for salvation. This paradox stands as a remarkable testament to God's sovereignty. Human defiance cannot thwart divine purpose. And what of Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor, who, with a simple act of washing his hands, declared himself innocent of Jesus' blood? His story too ends in despair, haunted by supernatural warnings, haunted by guilt, and ultimately by disgrace and rejection. No amount of physical cleansing could erase the stain of participating in the innocent one's death. Pilate's collapsing career and troubling demise remind us that attempts to disown responsibility before God are futile. He, too, faced the impartial judge, whose verdict no earthly power can overturn. As we contemplate these intertwined lives and their fates, we are called to recognize the unyielding reality of divine justice, balanced with unparalleled mercy. Power may rise and fall, but God's plan remains sure. Those who oppose him will meet their judgment, sometimes swiftly, sometimes as the slow unraveling of regret and despair, but always without escape. Yet, the grace extended through Jesus' sacrifice offers every soul the chance for redemption. Beyond their failures, reflect now on the weight of this truth. Have you witnessed justice unfold in ways that challenge human expectations? Has mercy met you in moments when judgment seemed inevitable? Join the conversation by leaving a comment with God's justice and mercy prevail. Like and subscribe to Bible Stories to walk further into these profound stories that teach us sovereignty, humility, and hope. May these reflections settle softly in your heart. No power on earth can silence truth. No scheme can thwart justice. But God's perfect plan, woven through seeming defeat, will always rise in mercy, justice, and eternal love. As we arrive at the final chapter in this profound journey, let us settle into a contemplative stillness, a sacred space where the echoes of power, pride, and divine justice converge. Caiaphas, Annas, and Pontius Pilate, figures whose names echo through history not merely as men who wielded authority, but as living examples of the ultimate truth that no human power can stand in defiance of God's sovereign will. Recall the unraveling of Caiaphas's reign-man, once clothed in the ceremonial robes of high priest, now stripped bare by the unyielding hand of divine judgment and the political power of Rome. His fall was swift and unmistakable. The riches, the influence, and the perceived security faded like morning mist. No longer the feared arbiter of life and death, he became a prisoner to regret, a man haunted by the very decisions that once defined his authority. The power that had seemed unassailable proved fragile, transient, unable to shield him from the consequences of opposing the Messiah. Annas, the unseen puppeteer who had orchestrated so much behind the scenes, met a fate fitting the severity of his deeds, bound in drying oxide, his body slowly crushed in agonizing suffocation. This cruel and suffocating death mirrored the spiritual constriction that grips those who cling desperately to worldly control, only to be undone by the very bonds they forged. His end stands as a stark reminder that divine justice can manifest in ways both sudden and excruciating, catching even the mightiest unprepared. And what of Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor, who symbolized political expediency? In a symbolic act, he washed his hands, attempting to absolve himself of guilt for condemning the sinless one. Yet no water, No gesture could erase the weight of responsibility. His descent into despair, political failure, and eventual disgrace reveals the futility of trying to escape God's sovereign justice. Pilate's haunting sleepless nights and the warnings his wife received illustrate that guilt left unresolved only deepens the soul's torment. Together, the fates of these men form a solemn tapestry woven with threads of ambition, fear, rebellion, and the inexorable truth that God's justice prevails. Their efforts to thwart the divine plan condemning Jesus, silencing truth, and manipulating power only accelerated the fulfillment of God's redemptive purpose. The cross, meant to be an endpoint of defeat, became the gateway of the greatest victory humanity has known. Reflect now on the destruction of the temple in AD 70, where the physical heart of the priestly power, the golden temple itself, was consumed by flames, stones dismantled as Jesus had prophesied. That cataclysm marked the end of a system that Annas and Caiaphas had guarded jealously. The lavish wealth and entrenched authority they clung to vanished into ash and memory, a testament to the fleeting nature of worldly power in the face of eternal truth. Yet amid this somber reflection springs an unparalleled hope. Jesus' sacrifice, the very event that these men sought to silence, offered an eternal gift of mercy and grace, a call to redemption that transcends human failure. Their story warns and instructs, but it also beckons us toward humility, forgiveness, and the assurance that God's justice is not only righteous but compassionate. Have you ever wrestled with the weight of your own decisions, felt the tug between worldly ambition and the call to surrender? If so, share your heart by typing "God's justice and mercy prevailed" below. Joining a community that walks together in awe of the divine plan unfolding beyond our understanding. As we close, remember, no matter how powerful we might appear, no matter how tightly we clutch our control, God's will is unstoppable. His justice is perfect, just, and full of mercy. The story of Caiaphas, Annas, and Pilate is not just history, it is a living mirror reflecting the choices before us every day. May we align ourselves with His grace, walk humbly in His truth, and embrace the hope found only in His sovereign hand.